delivering our next presentation. So take it away, please. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you, Darren. And thank you, Heather, for your talk as well. It was really really quite interesting and quite moving, actually. I am Rachel. I am an academic librarian at UAL. And before that, I worked for 18 years at the British Library. If Sasha's talk to start us off with was a lush bath bomb, mine's probably going to be a scrub down with carbolic and cold water by comparison. I'm afraid I am going to be reading. It is probably going to be a little bit dry. I may be using quite a lot of kind of technical terms, but hopefully what I'm talking about we can all relate to. So I am going to attempt to turn my camera off if I can. Okay. Have I turned my camera off? No, I haven't. Now I have. Okay. So, first of all, I want to say I hope that my title hasn't misled anybody. I've even actually changed the wording in the title. We can just go back one. The title was information, but I've changed it to education. But it doesn't matter because it isn't changing the content of what I'm talking about. I'm not going to be talking about digitalization projects and publishing platforms. Instead, my presentation is going to be based upon a paper that I had published in the Arts Librarian Journal, where I raised the question, just how critical can librarians be? What I want to do is reflect back on the commodification of higher education in order to suggest that critical librarianship needs to focus more on the origins of critical theory, which was founded upon a Marxist approach towards class struggle. My title then is a pun and a way of relating back to the famous essay by Walter Benjamin, Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction. My reasons for doing this are manifold. First of all, I was fortunate enough to be educated in art history and philosophy and critical theory at Middlesex University, which was born out of the Hornsey School of Art. I was taught critical theory and we constantly debated debates around class. When I came to library work, I was quite frustrated that critical theory and social justice policy was being talked about, but it often lacked discussions around class in library literature. It can feel sometimes like working class is a taboo subject and as though it has gone away and we are no longer an issue. I'm proud to be working class and I am encouraged by campaign groups such as Museum Muck and library professionals such as Sam Potwich and of course Darren Flynn, who are discussing the working class experience within libraries and are critically engaging with the literature around this. I hope to add my voices to this discourse taken up by Darren for a working class consciousness to be included in critical librarianship. My provocation then is, where is the critical theory and class consciousness in critical librarianship? Or just how critical can we be? All opinions expressed on my own, they're not reflective or sponsored by any institution that I have worked for. So, the commodification of higher education and neoliberalism and globalization, these are all topics that we think, we're very familiar with. It all kind of happened a long time ago. But I feel there's a little bit of sector suppressing of it. I think we've kind of forgot about it. So I think it's important to kind of remind ourselves of that process. I then want to quickly look at the consequences for libraries, remind us of critical librarianship. I'm going to talk a very little bit about critical theory and the contradictions and then some conclusions. So let's get into this. I'm not going to read the quotes on the screen, by the way. They're just there to kind of back up what I'm talking about, but hopefully I will give you enough space to kind of to read them. In higher education, we are constantly witnessing rising tuition fees and a shortfall in student recruitment targets, which effectively lead to redundancies, restructures, course and departmental cuts, and an ever-increasing dependency on higher fees paid by overseas students, which in turn can lead to stress and issues like workplace bullying, a lack of willingness by staff to collaborate and share their experiences as a way of protecting their own jobs. We could ask if higher education has a sustainable business model, but I will leave that to senior management. For now, I want to look back at what got us here today, which is namely neoliberalism and the commodification of HE. The evolution of libraries and the profession as an institution has experienced various chapters from the 16th century onwards, progressing from the keepers and protectors of books to educational institutions, philanthropic activities, and the rise of the public library, arguably produced a paternalistic paradigm within the public sphere of the democratic societies. The role of academic libraries is still in flux, with evolving stakeholder relationships. Concerns range from budgets, spiraling subscription and publishing monopolies, reconfiguring of library spaces, hybrid working, and AI, just to name but a few. At the nexus is the commodification of HE that deems all players to be consumers, and it is out of this landscape that critical librarianship was developed. A traditional Marxist perspective considered that the educational system in a capitalist society is a way of reproducing the existing class hierarchies, ensuring that working class children remain within their social strata. Educational reforms are not new and have often been problematic. For example, in the UK, in 1944, the Butler Education Act established the rights to secondary education for all grammar schools. We then had the development of comprehensive schools and technical colleges, polytechnics, and the government grant system, all of which gave working class kids a chance to escape their allotted place on the production line. Then Thatcher's government in the 1980s purged and privatised the public services. We then saw polytechnics brought into university systems. In the mid-1990s, the World Trade Organization and the General Agreement in Trade for Services was established to cover the entire education sector. It imposed a reform on education policy, classing HE as a non-merit good. Globalization and neoliberal governments advocated privatization and the internationalization of higher education, using market ideology to compete on the free market for revenue, effectively transforming HE into an international tradable commodity. In 2001, the UK's government in HE was redefined. State grants were replaced by tuition fees paid for by households and the private sector. And these fees became a key income source, reducing the social value of education to a commercial service that had to make a profit. Back in 2016, the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills published a white paper on the knowledge economy, social mobility and student choices. The paper classified universities as national assets that could support the economy by increasing competition and choice. Like any business, the marketing of HE had to appeal to as many customers as possible, which has been mythologized as a projection of the Enlightenment for opening up access. While stats show diversity of a widening participation in students from non-traditional backgrounds, this excludes class. Students from poorer and working class backgrounds are prohibited by the changes in funding. And while diversity is important, it forced a demand for more flexible instrumental learning and non-linear routes to academic qualifications, a greater dependency on technology, distance learning, and more part-time study, as a lot of students now have to work in addition to studying. Little wonder then that students' perception of their education has been reduced to a return on their investment. Academic knowledge is no longer value enough. In this capitalistic paradigm, education has become a vocational preparation. Graduates want to learn pragmatic skills and expect to achieve higher employability. This influences the curriculum, shifting the focus to more vocational subjects. As government's research indicates a lack in skills in industry, arts are out. The Arts Council for England is currently under review. Meanwhile, sciences and maths are deemed privileged subjects. Marx conceived that inquiry is a vehicle that improves, reforms, revolutionises social life. However, higher education has been transformed into a business, and as such, it is relevant to use Marxist theory to critique it. In Marx's conceptualization, the commodity is an object that extracts the labour of others, which is then exchanged for profit. The commodity has two kinds of content, material and immaterial. These are generated in turn by two kinds of labour, physical and intellectual and cultural. As post-industrialisation moved away from the production of tangible goods, it was replaced by an immaterial products such as knowledge and information, which are given exchange values. It is possible then to understand how qualifications and education has been transformed into commodities in a culture of academic capitalism, where the increased demand for higher education has led to changes in supply. The exchange between students, faculty, and indeed the immaterial labour of librarians has become an economic transaction in the student as consumer and university as brand relationship. This leads to an over-bourgeois production. In other words, there are too many degrees and not enough jobs to match. And just as we are drowning in a world of material objects, we are also living with information overload. And so this system goes round and goes on with no dogmatic conclusion. The marketisation of HE has significant consequences for libraries, as we have seen a reduction in stable budgets and job security, and a dependency on flexible, poorly paid staff. For the library to remain at the core of learning in this rapidly evolving landscape, it is necessary to converge, redefine, and integrate services by implementing typical principles of a consumer managerial model of the business world, such as competition, profitability, risk, value for money, entrepreneurship, and innovative approaches by environmental horizon scanning, or risk the potential takeover of services by other departments. In 2015, Carol Nicholson wrote that the academic library was becoming McDonaldized in the massification of higher education to support the global knowledge economy, with billions of degrees sold worldwide, taking on managerialism and educational instrumentalism in a simulacrum of business, resulting in a new soft hegemony. The very existence of the library space is now threatened as physical collections are becoming increasingly obsolete. Reference desks are used less. Globalization demands that international forms of knowledge are readily accessible anywhere, affecting changes in pedagogy and online learning. Librarians have had to support a higher number of students and their evolving needs, become skilled in marketing and social media to provide immediate information in a familiar format, and promote their brand to appeal to a wide range of student consumer by representing distinction, the prestige of scholarly outputs, and of course preparing students for a career. The do more with less mentality prevails, where metrics are used to justify and demonstrate value and impact in economic terms. These are all incongruous to librarianship, but have become necessary, leaving the library to perform a balancing act as uncertainty and change have become the new normative. Libraries might contribute to creating and sharing knowledge, but this is mediated by external forces that drive change and control how knowledge is produced and discovered. Technology is an historical development which mediates libraries like no other. From the invention of the printed catalogue to the development of computerization, the librarian's custodian power was redistributed. The digital transformation, or the fourth industrial revolution, combined with pressures of marketisation, escalating publishing costs, discovery and sharing tools such as Google Scholar, Mendeley, ResearchGate, advances in AI and chatbot, further problematise the role of academics and the library, leading to fears about job losses. These technological advances have arguably democratised access to information and disrupted the power dynamic between the university, the library and its users. While some developments are progressive, they can be understood dialectically, in so much as the opportunities and developments are contradictory. What is an opportunity for some translates to redundancies, pay cuts, and reduced services for others, leading to instability as knowledge becomes mere exchange value. In this shifting landscape, the traditional role of the librarian is disrupted, which is where critical librarianship finds traction. Critical librarianship is not new either. It evolved out of the Progressive Librarians Guild activist movement, which was formed in New York in 1990. The very existence of this conference is evidence that the CritLib movement is part of the epistemological element of the profession. This practice uses its position to destabilise discourses and authoritarian pedagogies to strive for a more inclusive and critical approach to challenging social injustice and power, contributing to debates around neutrality, free speech, critiquing historically hegemonic classification systems, questioning the curriculum, and collection biases, plus developing collections to include alternative material types, such as zines. These are all efforts to represent diverse and marginalised voices, and are commendable developments the approach and the networks have achieved. The library is in flux as a reflection of the society that formed it. It is logical then that some librarians have since turned to critical theory to interpret the social political effects of society on their function and the institutional system in which we are based. Traditionally, libraries have aspired to be democratic, but yet also continue to uphold the hegemonic power structures that frequently privilege middle-class concerns. While the CritLib movement seeks to address issues of inequality and social justice, class is almost never mentioned, as pointed out by Flynn et al. In 2023. I quote, "Literature within librarianship is extremely limited in addressing concerns of social class. Even within the CritLib movement, working class knowledge and experience remains unrepresented," end quote. So to turn to critical theory then, critical theory developed out of the Institute of Social Research in the Frankfurt School, led by Max Horkheimer and other significant philosophers, who critiqued the way power ideologies govern society, culture, economics, reason, history, and the class structures. Their interpretations of Marxist theory privilege dialects as a possible approach to challenging the ideological structures of capitalism that affects all aspects of life. Such an approach examined where patterns of change and tensions exist within the hegemonic ideological society as spaces for potential change. The philosophers involved had varying arguments and conflicting interpretations, and like critical librarianship, there was no overarching manifesto. For Marx and the critical theorists, all aspects of historical development are structured through the exploitations of the material conditions of society, which only reproduces itself. As I have mentioned, library work is immaterial. It creates cultural work, which in turn serves ideological functions. So what this means is critical librarianship is not outside of this system. Hines and Ketcherman 2020 states that critical theory has become used for various debates and subjects, which reduces its essence of being critical. However, they go on to point out that the very function of providing free access to information is in and of itself potentially a critical practice. Critical theorists Adorno and Horkheimer conceptualized the mass production of culture in what they called the culture industry. In this process, the standardization of culture reduces it to a commodity that is easy to consume and pacifies audiences. The consumption of information today is no different. For example, we all know that our media feeds work on algorithms to appear personal so that they're easy to consume. But what this does is deteriorate our critical thinking muscle. If information then contributes to knowledge, it can be understood as a social product of paradoxes between the material world and theory historically conditioned and expressed through narratives. The structures inherent in librarianship contribute and are exploited through these narratives. We might ask how critical librarianship's practice is serving the marketisation of the commodity paradigm of education, which is why, through a critical theory lens, our practice should encompass critical self-reflection. As critical librarianship becomes institutionalised, it also demonstrates its power to make changes. But this involves contradictions that attempts to critique the institution whilst also being complicit within it. Yet, this is reflective of the tensions between resistance and complicity in society as a whole, which requires reflection and understanding of our identities as socially constructed. For instance, such questions as intellectual freedom versus ethical issues and the access to knowledge compared to the instrumental use of it as a tool of domination and control. However, the dialectical position between these irreconcilable contradictions produces a hiatus where change can happen. In the UK, the profession of librarianship and its users are a culturally homogenous socio-economic group of white middle-class individuals. In the profession, a systemic demand for a higher qualification remains, which requires finances and time commitments. To gain this qualification leaves graduates in debt to enter an existing overqualified job market where competition is high and entry-level jobs demand experience, often expected to be gained voluntary. This is especially true within the arts, including art librarianship. If there were more apprentice schemes or experience was valued over expensive qualifications, it would encourage more diversity in the sector from a broader socio-economic background instead of maintaining class boundaries. Professionalisation is built into the role without reflecting how occupations change or the system that they must operate within is a hierarchical structure of power and privilege. Chartership, for example, should count for something, but having to pay to hold it proves that it is little more than a capitalist badge. A working class voice is marginalised or absent, even from critical librarianship literature. This reinforces a positive image of the library as an idealistic, neutral space removed from power structures, contradicting the ambition of the library's social benefit. Indeed, as pointed out by Crew 2020, even academic qualifications do not remove the hierarchical nature of the institution and classism from colleagues. The sector structure supports the system of academia and capitalist exploitation that critical librarians want to critique. Indeed, class is rarely discussed, but should be an imminent motive for self-reflection. Critical librarians could disrupt this status quo. However, we remain employees, part of a profession where power structures operate and as such limits the interventions and critiques of it. Critical librarianship does provide a theoretical approach which can open up conversations and ideas that once may have seemed irrelevant to librarians, especially within the commercial realms of education. If critical librarianship wants to destabilise the dominant discourses that reproduces this structure, it should be ready to move out of the library and return to the genesis of critical theory by exposing the economic and class restraints within the institution and its profession by a self-critical turn. Self-reflection might also consider the institutional mythology about how the sector sees itself as altruistic, a sacrificing role working for the greater good with quasi-religious overtones. Vocational awe affects the unspoken aspects of librarianship, such as ideas, values, and assumptions about themselves as a profession. This image results in beliefs that libraries as institutions are inherently good and sacred and therefore beyond critique. However, Chris Bro noted, these are often empty signifiers, despite the many quote, fawning love letters written about the library, end quote, demonstrating that it is a paternalistic, caring occupation. So just how critical can librarians be, given that they work within and contribute to the very matrix of power structures they wish to overthrow? Critical librarians have realised that their role holds power, and it can be used to activate changes. Such valuable work has come out of discussions focused on race and gender, and the same must now follow for social class too. Conversely, power dynamics happen not just in the collections or stacks, but also on the job at everyday level, where microaggressions and power can be played out. If critical librarianship is to remain relevant and not to be subsumed into a self-referential echo chamber for the privileged, it must also be self-critical. Colleagues at all levels, especially frontline lower paid staff, need to be included in discussions and alliances outside the institution, and the library space could be formed to create solidarity. In recent times, when libraries have had no other choice but to strike for better pay and conditions, it showed that this was a practical example of joining forces, where those on picket lines were no longer seen by their job title or skill set, but simply as comrades in a shared fight to improve recognition. So to summarise what I said at the start, in the commercial landscape that HE operates within, students have become consumers of education and information, which in turn has been transformed into a commodity that the university factory sells for a profit. Teaching students to be critical of the capitalist system is a start, but it must be accompanied with the desire for change, to change the state of injustice in society too. The educationist Paulo Freire, who was influenced by the lives of the working class in his homeland of Brazil, believed that critical conscience raising was a valuable aspect of education. And as critical librarians, we can facilitate students' ability to develop critical thinking, to confront this system and reject it. This attitude would ideally influence every decision we make, from the books we purchase, but equally to be mindful of those we weed and throw out too. The attitude that books on critical theory are no longer taken out, so we need to throw them away and instead focus on well-being, is feeding into a narcissistic and infantilized generation. It is not helping foster criticality. Perhaps our practices should engage students to think critically about the dichotomy of the commodification of HE, whereby learning, knowledge and education have been reduced to a commodity, and the university the store in which it can be purchased. Dialectically speaking, this means part of the problem and the solution. Students want to be challenged and grow. If we give students colouring books and jigsaws, we are going to be producing children. If we give them critical theory texts, we produce thinkers. We should never stop striving to overthrow power structures to pursue a fairer society. The more librarians can help their readers work towards emancipation, the better. For our role as librarians is to help students learn to interpret the world. The point remains to change it. At least Marx used the library with this ambitious supposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. That was brilliant. And I think if you look in the chat at some point later, you'll see a lot of engagement. I think that was ringing out for a lot of people there. I haven't had any questions, I didn't think, that have come through the chat, but I am also aware we are at 29 minutes past.
Sure.
Are you okay with people getting in touch with you either
Absolutely.
at the
My
point or later on with
emails,
questions?
yeah, my email's on the slides. Yeah, I'm very happy to kind of discuss it or not discuss it. But yeah, please do reach out if you want to talk further about it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording there.